Hi everyone. As you're wrapping up your rough drafts and your peer reviews for your Literary Analysis 2 on poetry, I wanted to start us thinking about your third unit, which will be on drama. So I'm going to walk through the PowerPoint that I'll have posted on Blackboard as well. So we have read we have read fiction and we've read poetry, and now we are working our way to drama. And drama is simply public fiction, and drama is intended to be seen. So keep in mind as you are reading these pieces for this unit that the ultimate goal and the ultimate hope is that you would be able to see them either live, which would be preferable, or via a video or television show of some sort. So they're much more spectacular than fiction in that they have oftentimes soundtracks and special effects, so that's a more sensory experience than just reading words on a page that you do when you read fiction or poetry. It comes from, drama comes from the Greek word action, deed, or performance. That's what drama means in Greek. And then theater is sight or contemplation. So we are watching performances take place. It is a production, since there are so many components that go into putting on a play or a performance. So think about if you've ever been in your school's plays or community theater or done acting or been to a live performance. Think about the costumes that have to be picked or sewn, the sets that have to be built, the light and the lighting effects, the sound to make sure that everybody in the audience can hear everything, the special effects if there are any, and then stage movement or cues. I have been to the Lanesboro Commonwealth Theater several times, and it's a small theater that's kind of circular, and I notice often that they have taped pieces on the ground for where the actors are supposed to stand, because everything is kind of choreographed like you would in a dance performance. So a person enters, he or she stands on his cue, and then the other actors move around that actor. Oftentimes this is important because the stages are relatively small, and so people need to be aware of where they're at in space. The best way to read drama is to pretend like you're the director. So we all know Steven Spielberg, a director who's produced some of the greatest pieces of film in American history. Try to think about how you would stage things as you're reading them. Would you put the chair here? What would you have this person wearing? What would be the music that's playing in the background? Are you having people speak softly or loudly, quickly or slowly? So you kind of get to decide how everything is set up. And obviously interpretations will vary. That's why if you have ever seen a live performance of something like Shakespeare, the performances will vary. And I know that I've seen some performances of Shakespeare that are updated to be set in present day, which can seem kind of jarring, but it's also a really interesting spin on how to interpret it, because Shakespeare's been around for 400 years and his words are still relevant to what we do today. So obviously, just like we see things differently when we read fiction or poetry, we're going to be able to interpret them and even set them up differently when we read and think about drama. Think about, if you've been to a play or performance, the stages and the staging that takes place. This slide kind of talks about the various types of stages that you might encounter. At the time when live theater was really popular, especially during Shakespeare's day, most of, not all of the actors were male. It was considered not ladylike to be an actor, so males would often play female parts, which kind of adds to the heightened comedy in a lot of Shakespeare's pieces, where you have a lot of gender bending and people dressing as the opposite sex in those pieces. Shakespeare's Globe Theater was it is kind of the ultimate idea of what a theater should be. So you have the stage and you have three sides around it, and you paid more money for better seats. And so there's kind of an open pit area in the front where people could stand, and you wouldn't have to pay as much. But also think about how this was a more informal kind of open air. People were drinking and eating, and if things weren't entertaining, people might get rowdy and start throwing things. So there were oftentimes little acts being played out in the audience themselves. So just like we do today, if we go to concerts or events, we pay more for better seats. That was the same case in Shakespeare's day at the Globe Theater. Often what we see today is more of a modern box stage. We are not necessarily surrounding the actors or the setting. So the stage is set up, there's curtains, what happens behind them before opening, they're scurrying around. And it's meant to give a little bit more freedom as to what they can do and the sets that they can build. And although I personally sometimes prefer the ones where you can kind of sit in a semicircle around and you're sitting almost on top of the stage and kind of looking down. It feels a little bit more intimate. So when you set the stage, you have to think about how you design everything, how you decorate it, and the types of scenery that you include. Do you make it minimalist? Do you make it realistic so it looks like an actual living room from somebody's house, or is it implied? When you read Trifles, which is one of the shorter pieces that you're going to read for this unit, the setting includes a sink, a cupboard, a stove, a table, and a rocking chair. So pretty minimalistic, and it takes place in that setting only. And then the props that are used are pieces that people pick up or interact with on the stage. So again, in the short drama Trifles, there's a bird cage, there's quilting pieces, and then there's an ornamental box referenced. So depending on the length of the play, whether it's a one scene or multiple scene, and what type of stage it's set in, you might have different types of props. As with poetry and fiction, you're going to have characters, you're going to have a plot, you're going to have some kind of a climax, but you also have stage directions. So there's a director or manager, as the actors rehearse, telling the actors what to do and how to move and how to do things differently or better. But you also have, unlike with fiction and poetry, you have dramatic irony, which means that we as the audience members often know more than some of the characters in the play. So this occurs usually when there's a narrator that kind of comes out and talks to the audience. And this might be at the beginning of the play or during the play. This last December, I saw the Christmas play, A Christmas Story, at the Weber Center for the Arts, downtown La Crosse. And you have the voice of the young boy is set as an older man kind of reflecting on his childhood. And he's basically walking around and narrating what's happening on the stage. So we know some of the tidbits that the characters or the actors don't know. So that's an advantage of having drama or plays. So because plays are often set in less than 2 hours, think about movies we go to or plays or concerts, they're not usually more than 2 hours long. You have to condense a lot down in order for it to work. So unlike in fiction, where you have more pages to develop characters, you kind of have to trim down the character quirks about your actors. So you often are going to have a little bit more flat characters, but you usually, like with fiction, have a protagonist, a person we're rooting for, and an antagonist, the person that is kind of the bad guy or the bad person. So because of time limits, you're going to get a little bit more slim, trim knowledge of who the characters are. So the protagonist is the main hero. The antagonist is typically the villain. Both are more rounded. We get to see them progress. And then you have the flat or minor characters who kind of interact with minimally the main characters. As you start to think about your reading of the drama pieces, here are some questions to start to consider. What does the audience learn about the characters from how they speak and how they interact? What do the characters' actions reveal about them? Sometimes the characters aren't themselves aware of what's going on within them or with others. What do other characters say about a particular character? So you might have a character who walks in and then leaves, and then the other two people are kind of sitting there gossiping or making comments. So that gives us an idea of how maybe we're supposed to interpret that character. And what does the audience learn from the appearance, demeanor, and movement of a particular character? So actors spend months, if not longer, studying how they're going to portray characters, and they, greats like Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, will learn dialect and dialogue and other languages and how to move themselves and the just the nuances that make, especially if they're portraying famous people, who they are. And so that takes some time, and that also reveals to us as viewers how we're supposed to interpret. As I mentioned before, the same play, the same performance can vary greatly depending on who's directing it and their budget and where it's being played. And then, as I mentioned, dramatic irony is we know more often than some of the characters do, and this helps create tension. So think about when you're watching a scary movie and the music is swelling, and you know that the bad guy is behind the door, but the oblivious young woman running in heels doesn't. So we are heightened in our attention because we know what's waiting for her, but she doesn't know. And I will include the PowerPoint so you can watch this short. I think it's about 3 to 5 minute long TED Ed video on dramatic irony. You, just like in fiction, you have to have some kind of a conflict, and that could include person versus person. So it could be oral conflict, we're having a verbal fight, versus a physical altercation. It could be person versus self, meaning I'm having my own internal conflict. I don't know what to do about a situation. I'm having some kind of a mental breakdown. I'm not sure how to progress, or I'm grieving. So those are all examples of person versus self. And then person versus nature would just be overcoming obstacles that Mother Nature throws our way, whether that's hurricanes or tsunamis or storms, or just staying inside on a rainy day. So a play can have any or all of those types of conflict. And just like in fiction, we have to have a conflict in order for it to be interesting. We have to have something to root for. Otherwise, we'd just be watching perfect people do perfect things, and that's boring. So we need that conflict. In a piece of drama, as with a lot of traditional fiction pieces, you have background information, so where it takes place, who the primary characters are. You have some kind of a conflict that is introduced, and then the tension starts to rise and rise and rise, and the moment when the tension is the most critical and the most tense is called the climax. And this is the moment where we don't know what's going to happen next, and everything in the drama kind of hinges on what happens next. And then after that moment, you have the releasing of the tension, and the protagonist faces the consequences of whatever happened, and then the denouement is the end, where everything is kind of resolved in some way. Sometimes that ending is not always satisfactory, sometimes it is. So some questions that you can start to ask yourself with the pieces of drama that you're going to read for this unit. I won't go through these each one by one, but they will be here for you on this PowerPoint. And again, the best way to assess a piece of drama after you've read it is to watch it. So when you get the opportunity to, always try to watch it. We will be reading most likely some Shakespeare, and it takes me a while to get into Shakespeare. It takes me a good couple rereadings to really understand the nuance of it, but seeing it brings something that sounds really stuffy and antiquated to life, and especially if it's done by really well-trained actors. So read it knowing that it's always better to watch it, which is not to say that you shouldn't read it, because there's lots of stuff in there that gets lost in the rapid-fire dialogue, especially in works by Shakespeare. But knowing kind of the basis, the primary characters, will help you go into watching it. So there's a quick overview on drama, which will be our final unit of reading, and then we will eventually work our way into the critical theory unit, which will mean we'll cover things like Marxism and psychoanalysis and feminism, and you will get to choose which of those theories you want to focus on, and then write your final project on dissecting a work of drama, fiction, or poetry using one of those theories. So that's what's coming up in the next weeks. These last 8 weeks together are going to fly by, so happy reading, happy watching. If you have questions, as always, let me know. Thanks.